The second book I'd like to review is Atomic Habits by James Clear. And honestly, this is probably my favorite. Not probably, it is my favorite book. I just love this book. James is an American author and he's a speaker. Although he's written Atomic Habits, he's written several other books. But this book in particular has sold over 25 million copies and it's been on New York Times bestseller list for a number of years. James is a former college baseball player and he was captain of the Denison team at his university when he was playing baseball there. And he became deeply interested in habits when he was recovering from a brain injury. It was quite a serious injury and it led him to have to really study behavior and behavioral change. And from his sort of research and studying and dealing with his own brain injury and personal injury, he really came up with some really, really clear and concise observations and tools that we can use if we want to change our lives through the power of habit. He launched his jamesclear.com in 2012, and he's written exclusively on these topics. And he's built a massive following in newsletters. Millions of people follow him and are very interested in what he has to say about habits. So I wanted to share with you just a couple of the sort of key highlights and takeaways from this book. But again, I would highly encourage you that if you read one book, this is probably the one that you should read first. So let's have a chat about some practical strategies for small and consistent improvements, which James Clear speaks to in his book. And this is not only for your personal life, but this work has also been implemented and utilized in organizations all around the world, and it has been widely featured in leading media outlets as well. So, number one, James again talks about this habit loop revolving around a cue, a craving, and a response and a reward. And again, very important to understand this process if we want to really explore and really deep dive into how habits are formed. And explains that habits are formed by behaviors which start with a trigger. They build motivation that leads to an action or response, and it ends in some kind of reward. And this really forms the foundation for building or breaking habits. So if we take one thing away from the book, it is probably the most important to understand how that habit loop works. Then he talks a little bit more about applying what he calls the 4 laws of behavioral change to build good habits. And these laws can also be applied if you want to change or break a bad habit. So the first one is you want to make the habit obvious. You want to be able to see it because we know that a lot of our habits are unconscious or not in our sort of level of daily awareness. The second thing you want to do is you want to make it attractive. Obviously, we're going to do stuff that we love to do. Thirdly, you want to make it really, really easy. And he talks about friction in habits. If you're trying to change a habit and it's really hard to do, you're not going to do it. So you've got to make it as easy as possible. And then number 4, you want to make it satisfying. And if it's a bad habit that you want to change, you need to try to make that behavior unattractive or not enjoyable. And we'll talk about that further down the train. So if we understand the habit loop and we understand this 4-step process to how we change our behaviors, then we're really off to a good start if we want to apply that in our lives. Number 3, he talks about how true change really starts with identity. And we alluded to this in our book review on the power of habit. So a shift from saying, I'm trying to do something to I am doing this or I am this. It's a very small but very important change. Think about if someone offers you a dessert after dinner at a party. Instead of saying, I'm trying to cut back on sugar, you say, I don't eat sugar, or I'm not a dessert. Thank you, I'm not a dessert person. It's a very different mindset. It's a very different identity. And you're really owning your position and your power in the scenario. The 4th point I wanted to highlight was the importance of focusing on systems over goals. Now, a goal is an outcome. So we'll often say, I want to lose 10 kilos, but that's just a dream or a wish. How are you going to do that? And that's very much comes down to not only your habits, but your systems. So what are the things that you need to put in place? How do you need to change your environment? How do you need to change what you do on a daily basis to make sure you actually achieve that outcome? And that leads me to point number 5, which is, yes, I want to lose weight, and that's a big thing. Why don't we start with something small? And he talks about how small habits are like, think about them as the compound interest of self-improvement. So little things done on a daily basis over a long period of time is the way that you go to create sustainable and lasting change. Trying to change everything overnight, we all know, is a recipe for disaster. So start with something small, something that you can do, something that you can commit to. Do it every day, and before you know it, it's a habit, and then you can tackle the next thing. Now, part of this conversation around designing systems is around designing your environment. So important. If you structure your surroundings to support your habit, obviously it's going to be entrenched, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to do that. The environment is a very, very powerful trigger for a lot of our habits. So what we want to do is avoid those triggers going off. And in order to do that, we need to obviously change our environment. So he talks a lot about that in the book, and I think that's very, very useful. Again, going back to this notion of identity and small wins, he talks about how repeated tiny actions accumulate. And there's been a lot of evidence to support this fact that if you give people something small to do, they start feeling good about themselves, they practice it over and over again, and it creates a snowball effect. And it reshapes your self-image through the embodiment of these small behaviors that become habits over time. So it's probably no surprise that habits are all about repetition, not perfection. The more opportunity you give yourself to practice a new behavior, the more it becomes entrenched and the more it becomes a habit. So establish the habit through consistency and then over time optimize it. So habits form through repetition, and once you've got that repetition happening, then you can take on more change, or you can optimize what you're currently doing. The 9th takeaway from the book that I thought was really, really useful was the how to use commitment devices to help you overcome bad habits. And what do we mean by a commitment device? So he gives an example of taking like a bad choice and making it harder for you to make that same choice, so you're less likely to do it. And the obvious example here is signing up to an AA meeting or committing to a gym. You're part of a wider group, and that is a commitment that you're making to your group to show up every day, to make sure that you're consistently continuing to practice that habit. The other example is if you are trying to save or pay off your home loan or pay off a debt, you would get your employer to take a portion of your salary and put it in another bank account so you can't touch it. That is a commitment device. So you're setting yourself up to a point that is impossible for you to continue to do that bad habit. And there are lots of other examples that he gives in his book. And I love it because it's a really good way that we can stop ourselves from continually repeating the bad habit. And finally, this is so important, what is rewarded is repeated. Immediate satisfaction reinforces habits, and it's absolutely the cardinal rule of behavior change. Things that make you feel good are things that you do. And very often we do things that make us feel good, even if they are bad habits. So the trick here is to find something that makes you feel good, that is a good habit, and put that in place of what you would typically do in response to a particular cue. And that is how you would change a bad habit. So if I can leave you with one thing as we wrap up this book review on atomic habits, is that all habits run on a 3-part cycle: cue, routine, reward. If you can identify the cue that triggers a behavior, then you can change the habit. And if you want to break a bad habit, you need to change the response to that cue with something that is positive while still delivering the same reward. And if you can hack that, you can change any habit. So it's really this idea that we are doing what we are choosing to do. Very often we're not aware, or it's not in our conscious awareness of why we're doing it. But if you just stop and you think about your habits, you look at your cues, you look at environment, you understand the habit loop, then you can start to make those interventions to break the cycle, to change your bad habits to good habits, or to create good habits in the first place and ensure that they stick forever. So I hope you've enjoyed this very brief book review, James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. It is my favourite book. It's a very easy read. There's lots of great stories and anecdotes in it. I love that he talks about tiny changes, remarkable results. I mean, that's really compelling. So yes, if it's one book you read, I think it's this one.